I just want to show you this. What a pleasure it is to see conservatives leading in literally every single province except Quebec, where it's sort of a three-way tie behind the Bloc Québécois, although they would get the most seats. I mean, it's probably within the margin of error, but it's astonishing to me to see that the Conservative Party are further ahead in the Atlantic than they are even in Ontario. Isn't that sort of amazing to you? It's amazing to me in terms of their actual raw votes number. Anyways, that's not what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about a more interesting poll question asked by Abacus. And that question is, what do you like best about living in Canada, and is it getting better or worse? It's a good one. What would you say? My first answer would be more sort of psychological and emotional than physical. I would say I like the feeling of being home. This is where I'm from. This is where I'm connected to the place and the people. But I'd say that's getting very much worse as we are being flooded with people who have no connection to us and don't come here to be connected to us. When you bring in 2 million new people a year, many of them don't speak English. They aren't culturally a fit. They're not going to become Canadians in a deep way. They're going to set up segregated ghettos. There will be no integration, let alone assimilation. You'll feel like a stranger in your own home. So my favorite thing about Canada is that it's home and it feels like home, and I'm really worried about that. So here's what Canadians said when they were asked. David Coletto says it's a really interesting question. So we asked unprompted what the best thing about living in Canada is and followed up with whether that is getting better, not changing or getting worse. Interestingly and not surprisingly, vote intention was linked to that as well. That's David Coletto talking about the reason he did the poll, but let's take a look. Look at that chart there. 32%. The fact that it's unprompted. So normally on a political poll, they say Liberal, Tory, Green, NDP. Here it was unprompted. They let people come up with the words themselves. 32% said freedom. Unprompted. I think that's amazing, don't you? I would have thought it had been drummed out of us by the state and by regime media and by our communist teachers' unions, but 32% of Canadians, unprompted, still say freedom. 19% say natural beauty in the environment. They're not talking about kooky environmental schemes like carbon dioxide or paper straws or banning plastic bags and bringing in carbon taxes. They're talking about what the word environment used to mean 35 years ago. Beautiful places to go hiking and camping and picnicking and sightseeing, going out to nature, going to the mountains or a national park. That's what people say they love about Canada, the second most thing. The third is opportunities and standard of living. 10% of people list that. Safety is next. Isn't that interesting? Do you feel safe in Canada? It's a high-trust society. We are safe, but it's eroding. I think it's getting worse. If you're in a small town, still pretty safe, but I doubt there's a soul in any big city in this country that feels safer than we did 5-10 years ago, especially when you have massive crime waves, often driven by foreign criminal gangs. Here's how Canada's largest urban police force recommended dealing with home invasion robberies coming to steal SUVs right off your driveway. Remember this from Toronto's police?
There's also updated advice for all vehicle owners, a message echoed by Toronto Police speaking at an Etobicoke safety meeting last month. Constable Marco Ricciardi had a new message for vehicle owners who keep their fobs in Faraday pouches.
To prevent the possibility of being attacked in your home, leave your fobs at your front door, because they're breaking into your home to steal your car. They don't want anything else. A lot of them that they're arresting have guns on them, and they're not toy guns, they're real guns. They're loaded.
That's why Galinsky says they will be installing the doorstops and taking YPR's advice seriously. But she'd like more action from police as well.
Yeah, and that's just the regular crime wave. Then you have massive pro-terrorist marches through the streets, in the middle of the street, around Jewish synagogues, vandalizing Jewish-owned shops, week after week, arson, even gunfire, masked thugs chanting threats and racism, and the police don't do a damn thing. In fact, some institutions give in to them, support them, like those encampments at universities. The police who declared martial law on peaceful truckers stand by while actual violence and threats of violence terrify people with a racial edge to it. Absolutely, we're less safe now than we were 5 years ago. You'll note that healthcare is down to just 7% of Canadians. Unprompted, only 1 in 15 Canadians, 1 in 14 Canadians says, oh, healthcare is the best. I remember when I was young, when you asked anyone official what the Canadian identity meant, most of the time the answer was Medicare. That's our Canadian identity. Medicare and the Charter of Rights, people would say. Can you even believe that? No one thinks that Medicare is great. No one loves publicly funded government-run healthcare. They've been burned. I don't think people have said that unprompted in 10 or 20 years. I like the answer on this poll. People say, what do you like about Canada the best? When people say, the people. Isn't that a great answer? People being the best part of Canada. Obviously, that's true. Diversity or culture. 5% of people said that, but those aren't the same thing, by the way. Diversity means differences. Different races, different ethnicities is typically what they mean. But culture could mean something totally different. It could mean arts and museums and history and architecture. That's sort of one definition of culture, language. But think of French culture, Italian culture, Turkish culture. Those things actually mean the opposite of diversity, don't they? Tell me the essence of being French. What's the essence of being, I don't know, Algerian? I'm just picking countries. It means the opposite of diversity. So I don't think that question made a lot of sense. But generally, an interesting list. By question, these were unprompted, but to categorize culture and diversity is the same thing. They're not. But even more interesting than those unprompted answers, I love the fact that freedom's number one, is how all of those wonderful things about Canada are trending. Remember, that was the second part of the question that Coletto asked. See, Abacus didn't just ask what your favorite thing about Canada is. The pollster asked if that thing is getting better or worse. And guys, the answers are bad on everything. That's the chart on the right there. Now, gray zone in the middle is people who say there's no real change. Bright green is when people say something's getting even better. Bright red is when something's getting even worse. So compare the green and the red. Ignore the gray for all purposes. The first thing is every single thing is getting worse. Everything, no matter what you like about Canada, you tell the pollsters things are getting worse. The only thing that is even close to being balanced is that answer on diversity or culture. 27% say it's getting better, 32% say it's getting worse. But like I say, I'm not even sure people agree on, they're not using the words for the same meaning. Culture and diversity are not the same thing. Some people might say diversity is getting more, and I think that's true, but that's not necessarily a good thing if it's getting more diverse. It's sort of a weird one. But put that aside, look at freedom, which is such a wonderful answer, the number one answer. 10% of Canadians, only 1 in 10, say freedom is getting better. 43% say it's getting worse. That's such a big number. That's not just right-wingers. That's everybody senses it, isn't it? That's freedom of speech, political freedom, even economic freedom too. That's what we all saw during the COVID lockdowns. That's what we all see now with internet censorship. People are worried about freedom. I think it's wonderful that they're saying so. Nature and beauty. In some ways, it's hard to imagine. How can it get worse? Aren't the Rocky Mountains still? The Rocky Mountains aren't national parks still national parks? Well, about that, here's a clip from our story about a fun beach in Ontario where thousands of newcomers from other countries, well, let me put it this way. They have a different way of using beaches than we do. Take a look.
And I told my kids, if we're going to go on the beach, watch out so you don't step in any human poop.
I've heard people are using tents and they're just like doing it in the sand so no one can see. I think it's really gross.
They're digging holes and they're pooping and putting tents up because they don't want to go to the washrooms. And I'm here to fact check that because that's not a lie. So
it makes me not want to swim and not want to be on the beach.
To be a responsible parent, you should be showing your kids that you can actually throw out their diaper in the washroom, not bury it at a beach.
Some of it's just common sense. Like, why would you do that?
They dig a hole and they use it for their bathroom.
I truly think that's on people's minds when they're asked about natural beauty. Trudeau has brought in 2 million new people to Canada in the past year, mainly on student visas, about 1 million, and work visas, that's about 750,000. They're often staying 10 people to an apartment in Toronto or Vancouver. It's so crowded where they live. So, of course, they're going to get out of the house and go to parks and national parks. And so now they're crowded and they're alienating. And that's just a fact. I mean, don't ask me, ask the people. Look at the answer to opportunities. Only 11% say that there are more opportunities. 44% say things are getting worse. One of the highest numbers on the entire chart. Of course not. No one can afford to buy a house in Canada, especially if you're competing against 2 million people a year needing housing that Trudeau's bringing in this year and next year and then following year. No one can live on minimum wage, especially since you're now being undercut by foreign workers earning even less than minimum wage in some cases. There are 450,000 unemployed young Canadians. There are 750,000 temporary foreign workers in Canada. Do the math. I already talked about the decline of healthcare in Canada, the biggest decline on the chart, by the way. The people, that's a great answer, it's plummeting too. It makes me very sad. But I don't think that Canadians are changing for the worse. I think it's other people who are coming here who are behaving badly. Those people are not from here. You can hear their foreign accent. Listen to this guy shout and scream and threaten. And how can you disagree that the people in Canada, well, it's not what it used to be. Take a look.
Whole street! Whole street! Whole street! Whole street! Whole street! Whole street!
Yeah, they're not your streets, mate. Or at least they shouldn't be, but that's who Trudeau thinks Canadians should be. He has given away our streets. So I guess I understand why people say that they're not happy with their neighbors anymore. They're not neighbors, they're just worried about the people. One last one, democracy. Similar numbers to the freedom answer. Only 8% say democracy is getting better. 39% say it's getting worse. And remember, we haven't yet even been told who the dozen Chinese spies in Parliament are. Remember that revelation? That CSIS, our spy agency, says there's a dozen compromised members of Parliament and senators sitting right now in our Parliament, and they're there. They haven't even been named, let alone kicked out. So yeah, great poll. Some hopeful answers. I love how many people care about freedom, don't you? But just some terrifying stuff too. It is depressing seeing that Canadians think our country is going down the drain, isn't it? Stay with us for more.